Right when she walked on stage, I literally said, "Oh wow," because she just brings such a presence with her.
I was so moved by the extraordinary grace and dignity of the coaches and the athletes. They have reminded us with eloquence and passion about the promise of this country, and especially the promise of our young people, and particularly the promise of our women.
It was wonderful to hear, Senator Clinton speak about the Rutgers team and Vivian Stringer, and talk about, the poise that they had in handling the situation that occurred.
So I hope when we think back on the events of the past few weeks here at Rutgers, we think about this campus and the example it has set for our country, for standing up for what is right, for saying enough is enough, for urging that we turn a culture of degradation into a culture of empowerment.
When she went to go see a school in New York, and the basketball coach told her, "Dare to compete," and then just leaned over and said that to her in such a private manner, but meant it to be such a personal challenge. And I like that she shared that with us, to be our personal challenge to compete.
And I was introduced by the captain of the basketball team, and I went up to the podium, and she was much taller than me. So I went to shake her hand, and she leaned over, and she whispered in my ear, "Dare to compete, Mrs. Clinton, dare to compete." It just took my breath away. And then I got to thinking, I really care about what happens on all of these matters, from healthcare to education to energy policy, obviously now to war and peace and America's standing in the world and so much else. So I decided to dare to compete.
I was encouraging her by here that, listen, you have to take Hillary Clinton's advice. You have to dare to compete. You have to get yourself involved more.
If you look back on all of our history and the struggles that were required to get us to where we are, ask yourself how many Americans would still be invisible and on the margins. If it hadn't been for the abolitionists, the suffragettes, the labor organizers, plaintiffs and lawyers who took on cases like Brown v. Board of Education. But so many people whose names will never be in the history books have exercised their rights as Americans to refuse to be invisible, to get themselves off the margins, to make it clear that they weren't going to put up with being mistreated, ignored, and relegated to some second-class status.
Things don't change overnight, but it will take time, and I think she's a strong person to encourage that for people, and just saying that eventually changes will happen, and she's willing to go headstrong and make them happen herself.
So what will we do now in the 21st century to advance the cause of human rights, to get more and more of our fellow Americans and people around the world to be seen, to make them visible to the media, to corporations, to ourselves? Earlier we were talking about how Rutgers has a chance to be the leader of this teachable moment in our country. In effect, to devise almost a pledge. We call it the Rutgers Pledge. And see whether we can spread it across the country. Asking, will you be willing to speak up and say enough is enough when women or minorities or the innocent and the powerless are marginalized or denigrated? This is one way to define leadership in our own lives, but we all have to be willing to take that challenge. And there are risks associated with it. You have to accept that you can't play in this game of life if you aren't willing to get off the sidelines. You have to dare to compete. So I hope with the leadership from Rutgers that the students here will set an example that will spread across America and maybe the world.
I really liked her presence as a speaker. I think she was really, everyone was just drawn to her. You couldn't take your eyes off of her. I think she's going to be a great, great candidate and hopefully president one day.